Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Today we are going to talk about Budología. For some, this word Budología may be a little unfamiliar. This is just to show the difference between theology and Budología. We don't speak of a theology in Buddhism. So we speak about what a Buddha is. Very often we find in books the life of the Buddha. Buddha as an individual, as a man who had birth and then certain things happened in his life. But here we are talking about, not talking about Siddhartha Gautama as Buddha, we are talking about what a Buddha is, what it means to be a Buddha. And here we have to relate this to what we spoke about earlier in the form of evolution. And Buddha is a highly evolved person, a human being who evolves to the level of a Buddha. And in doing so, the human being rises above ordinary human nature. He becomes superhuman and supernormal. Superhuman means he begins to gain certain psychic powers which ordinary people do not possess. Of course, today we find people talking about parapsychology, where they speak about certain psychic powers, like reading others' minds or telepathic communication and things like that. Even recalling past lives. These are not normal things. So they like to call it paranormal. That means they don't want to raise that to a higher level than the normal level. It is just parallel to the normal level. That's why the paranormal. But here I want to point out that these psychic powers, which are called Uttari Manussa Dhamma means superhuman. That's the meaning of the word Uttari Manussa, superhuman. And here we have what are called Pancha Abhinya. Pancha Abhinya. Abhinya means super knowledge, and 5 kinds of super knowledge. And these 5 kinds of super knowledge are Iddhivida Jnana, Pubbe Nivasanussati Jnana, Dibba Chakku Jnana, Dibba Sota Jnana, and Parati Chitta Vijanana Jnana. Now, the meaning of those words, Iddhi Vidajnana, means certain psychic powers like flying in the air, walking on water, plunging into earth as if you are plunging into water. And producing many bodies, not just one body, so that you can be present at two different places at the same time. Now that sort of power is seen not as supernatural power. Now in some other religions these are seen as supernatural powers. These are not supernatural, these are supernormal and superhuman, but not supernatural. They are seen as natural powers. And this is simply what are called iddivida jnana. It's coming from a knowledge that normal people don't have. For example, normal people don't think in terms of atoms and molecules. But scientists have discovered that things are working according to atoms and molecules. Now when we speak of a solid, we see a solid, but the scientist says the solid is because the molecules are together, very close together. And that same solid, when it becomes a liquid, it means that the molecules are separating far apart. And when it becomes a gas, the molecules are separating even further away, and this is why it becomes a gas. So this kind of understanding, it appears that the person who has psychic powers possess this, and basing on that understanding, this person can even change the form of its own body and become even invisible, and also turn into energy and even travel at the speed of light, so fast speeds. So like that, they possess certain powers over the body, and this is why they are able to do things like that. And the other thing is the ability to recall past life, parachitta vijnana, pubbe nivasanussati jnana, which is to recall past lives. Not just one life or two lives or even 10 lives, hundreds and hundreds of lives they can recall very clearly, as if you are recalling something that happened yesterday. So this ability is also psychic power, supernormal psychic power, a superhuman, because the ordinary human beings are not able to do that. And again, dibba chakku jnana means, it's called the dibba chakku, means the divine eye. That is also a thing like X-ray vision, telescopic vision, microscopic vision. That sort of vision is this divine eye, which is also not a normal common thing. And the other one is the divine ear, hearing sounds that normally people don't hear. That's called the divine ear, dibba sota. And the other one is parachitta vijnana jnana, being able to read other people's thoughts, read the minds of others. That is what's today called telepathy. Now that is also a power which is supernormal and superhuman. But these are not seen as supernatural. It is all natural, and anyone can develop these powers if they begin to practice the teachings of the Buddha and evolve to a very high level of maturity. It's a level of maturity of the mind. So these are the powers that a Buddha will have, because a Buddha is a highly matured yogi. Today we call these rishis, yogis. In ancient times they were called rishis. And so the next level is another kind of knowledge that the Buddha possessed, which raises him even above the superhuman type. It goes beyond the Uttari Manusa. Now today we have this concept of Superman, and the Superman is also supposed to be able to fly in the air and things like that. But this Superman, according to the movies and the stories, is some person who has come from another planet or something like that, and not really a human being grown on this earth. They see it that way. But when we speak of the Superman in this Buddhist way of thinking, Superman is an evolution of the human being to a point where he begins to gain these psychic powers. And this evolution is not simply a physical evolution. It is a mental evolution, which is the evolution of consciousness. That means the human being evolves further by evolving the consciousness. And to evolve, for this evolution of consciousness to take place, it cannot happen automatically like biological evolution, where the body begins to evolve. That physical evolution is different from this mental evolution, because the mental evolution has to take place consciously instead of unconsciously. The mental evolution is an unconscious process. The unconscious evolution, the physical evolution is unconscious, whereas this mental evolution is a conscious process. That means it is consciously done. Each individual has to consciously, by conscious efforts, begin to evolve and produce this process of evolution. So it is very important for the individual to practice a certain method, a technique, which is the technique of evolution of consciousness. And that technique is what the Buddha called the Noble Eightfold Path, which I translate not as noble. The word noble is incorrect there. It is supernormal. So I don't translate the word Arya as noble. I translate it as supernormal. This is a technique which is a supernormal technique, not a normal technique. It's a supernormal process of development of the mind. And we'll be discussing that in more detail later, the supernormal method. But the important thing is that the Buddha rises above the normal, and this is through the sixth knowledge. And the sixth knowledge is what is called asavakya jnana. The asavakya jnana, the word asavakya means asava ceases. Asava really means a flowing in. The word asava means an inflow. And I translate this not as normally people translate it as cankers or some word which doesn't carry much meaning. It is an influence, inflow, flowing in is an influence. What this means is simply it was Sigmund Freud who used a different term for this. He called it instinct. The instinct was used because he thought that these emotional urges that come up is starting from inside the body, and it is always trying to seek an expression outside. This was a mistake made by Freud. Freud himself saw that this instinct starts outside with the stimulation of the senses. The sensory stimulation begins a process which is first a cognitive process, which means when light falls on the eye, the first thing that happens is that you see something. And when the sound comes to the ears, you hear something. Now the seeing and the hearing is the cognitive process, cognition or recognition of something. Now really the word recognition is a recognition. What it means is it is by comparing with earlier cognitions that you begin to identify something. If you have never seen a flower before, you will never be able to identify it as a rose or a whatever the flower is. The identification is the recognition. You recognize this as a certain thing. If you have never seen a clock before, you will never be able to say this is a clock. It's always comparing with the past images that you have seen. So that is the recognition. But the whole process is a process of cognition. Now once you have cognized and seen something, the next step is to form a concept about it, to interpret this. And the interpretation also is based on earlier experiences. You begin to interpret this as, say, something dangerous. If you begin to interpret that as something dangerous, that leads to an emotional reaction to it in the form of fear. Or if you interpret that as something pleasant, distress. So that word distress is really what the Buddha called dukkha. Stress and distress. Stress is the temporary disturbance of the mind which calms down. But if this disturbance doesn't calm down and continues, that was called distress. The reason is that every time we begin to react emotionally. We get excited. It can come in the form of a desire, like sexual love, or even in the form of anger, or it can come in the form of fear and worries. Now the problem is that when this disturbance comes up, we cannot run away all the time from what we fear. We cannot always get rid of what we hate. We cannot always get what we desire. That means the reaction has not been completed. The disturbance is there, but it doesn't calm down. The mind calms down only when we have got what we desire, or got rid of what we hate, or when we have run away from what we fear. Now, if it is not possible to achieve that, then the disturbance remains, and the muscles in the body become tensed, and the tension is not released. Because the tension is released in the action to obtain what we desire. And the tension is fully released only when we have obtained what we desire, or got rid of what we hate, or run away from what we fear. So this is the distress that this scientist saw. So he said stress is okay because it is temporary disturbance and then it calms down again. But distress is when the disturbance is not calmed down. It's like having in a country what is called the emergency situation. So the disturbance is like an emergency, a temporary thing needed to act. But if the emergency situation continues for years and years, then the whole country becomes sick, like the body becoming sick and invalid. So the whole body becomes sick with this disturbance, if it is. So then it can turn into a nervous breakdown. A person can even go insane or physically sick as a result. So this type of thing is observed by the modern people when they talk about stress and distress. But the Buddha saw it as a constant thing, this whole reaction. And this emotional reaction has to be stopped. And this is seeing that and stopping that whole reaction is what is called the asavakya jnana. Jnana is the knowledge of this and the stopping of this. So the Buddha was able to stop this reaction completely. And that is the meaning of becoming a Buddha and getting rid of the three things called lobha, dosa and moha. Lobha is the desire for the pleasure or the pleasant things. Dosa is the hatred of pain. And moha is the thought, I am. Because with this emotional reaction, which is self-centered, a concept of self comes into being. And what the Buddha pointed out was the concept of self is not just an ordinary thought. It is tied to the emotion, because the emotions are self-centered. And as long as we have this emotion, the concept continues. And it is this concept of self that separates people from other people, and individually separated from other people. And they begin to think of themselves and what am I going to do in life, or what am I going to achieve, and how other people begin to disturb this individual. Even if they try to do social service, they begin to complain, well, I have been doing so much social service, no one is grateful. There is no gratitude. And then I don't have any time for myself. I am just using all my time to serve other people. What about myself? So that kind of thought, which is a self-centered thought, arises because of this concept of self. And the concept of self is also all the time clashing with other people. And so we have crimes, we have wars, we have all these bad behavior. What we call bad behavior is anti-social or anti-social behavior. And that anti-social behavior is the result of this concept of self. So it's not only the emotional lobha and the dosa, which is the desire and the hatred, there is also the concept of self, which is creating the problems. And a Buddha is a person whose mind is free of this emotional lobha and dosa, the desire for pleasure and the hatred of pain, and he is also free of the concept of self. I am, the thought I am, the thought mine, the thought of self disappears. So when we think of the Buddha, we are thinking of a completely pure mind, a selfless, completely selfless mind. And so it's not only just the psychic powers which makes a Buddha, but the purity of mind and the complete selflessness which produces infinite love and compassion for all beings. To think in terms of all beings rather than just myself or mine. So this is the meaning of a Buddha. And so we'll be talking further about the teachings of the Buddha. So I hope you understood this. May you all be well and happy. Thank you.